Sure, in the movies, this is all pretend, but in real life, you gotta be prepared for any type of an emergency. You can't predict, but you can prepare.
Yeah.
How'd you know? The ball called.
Be prepared at LAFD.org.
The 111th Congress and President Obama face a daunting task of fixing a failed banking system in the United States. Los Angeles will be looking towards Washington in the coming months. Like Humpty Dumpty, the seemingly invincible American financial system has had a great fall. Among the new president's economic team will be old faces with new titles. Not old in terms of age, but old in terms of being a part of the American financial community, which reaped huge profits, gambled big, and lost big. It's been the year of the average Joes. Joe the plumber received a significant amount of attention in the presidential debates. And today we have a Joe the banker, whose credentials are far more vast than Joe the plumber. Joseph Lignac is a partner with LA and Washington, D.C. based Venable. Joe is an expert in the banking regulatory world. Welcome, Joe the banker.
Thank you for having me. And by the way, unlike Joe the plumber, I have my license.
Oh, I am so glad to hear that you have your license. Okay.
Very important.
So you're going to get to opine here on the new economic cabinet. Does Timothy Geithner, Christina Romer, Lawrence Summers, and Melody Barnes have the right stuff to take the leadership helm in Washington?
Well, I think you have to take a look at, there's going to be a change in policy. And the policy, I think, in going forward is probably, I would call it cautious regulation versus a laissez-faire approach to banking regulation. And what we've learned over the last year, particularly over the last 8 to 10 years, is the fact that the markets, economic laissez-faire regulation really doesn't work that well because sometimes the markets go haywire. And also, too, there's a really important component here of safety and soundness in terms of regulation of the marketplace. Safety and soundness is what is necessary to be able to make a reasonable profit, to manage risk, and to have capable management in order to return to the shareholders. That's an important component. But also, it's, do we understand what's going on here? And I think one of the things that has occurred in the last couple of years is we've lost control of being able to understand the real complexity of the marketplace. So I think we're going to take a step back and say, let's re-regulate, and let's go forward slowly, loosening the strings of regulation when necessary, but pulling back and making sure that the federal banking regulators and the state banking regulators really can examine and supervise and know what's necessary so that people have got the proper capital and we don't have the mess that we're in now.
Well, this cabinet, Timothy Geithner, Treasury Secretary, has served 3 presidents. Christina Romer, out of Berkeley, is a financial historian, has written a book about the Great Depression and has written about recessions. Lawrence Summers was in the Treasury Department chair during the last year of the Clinton administration. And Melody Barnes comes out of Senator Kennedy's campaign and Senator Kennedy's camp for 15 years. So they're really old Washington faces. So are they the right people? Is Obama playing it too safe, or should he have tougher regulatory people in place?
Well, one of the things that's kind of important, and things happen so fast nowadays. We were talking about the S&L crisis in the early 1990s, and it seemed to be moving at a snail's pace, even though they were closing down institutions actually relatively quickly every couple of weeks. Now it's moving in an almost instantaneous fashion. But what's important is the historical perspective, and many of those individuals that you named have got the gray hair, have been around, and are, from an historical perspective, understand what came before. And one of the things about our financial economy is that we go in cycles. Somewhere between 50 and 60 years, we have a major financial crisis, and lo and behold, we have one now. But the remedies that we put in place are the things that caused the next crisis. And so what you need to do is reverse engineer, go back and say, what really happened here? Why did it occur?
So is this why I put a historian? Oh, Christina Romer?
Very important, because what came before, for example, a lot of folks are criticizing the removal of the Glass-Steagall Act restrictions, which separated investment banking from commercial banking. And all of a sudden, through the auspices of Senator Graham, we put them back together, allowed them to be affiliated, and they were borrowing and affiliating themselves and trading assets back and forth and lending to each other. And that really added to this mess. Also, too, the leverage factor that was permitted significantly added to the problem we've got today. So, question, if you don't understand where it came from, you may not be able to fix it. But understanding the historical perspective may really help us in terms of coming up with the next structure, because that's going to be one of the real goals of the next administration.
But will we have the power? I guess that's the question. In other words, Summers, of course, was the former Treasury Secretary, so he obviously has some chutzpah. Plus, he took on a lot of controversy in Harvard with comments that he made over the years, and so he's a guy who's had a lot thrown at him in the past. But will Timothy Geithner and Melanie Barnes and Christina Romer really have the power to really weigh in and encourage change and more regulation?
Oh, I think with the new administration, certainly a new administration has got the first 100 days, the first 1,000 days when they're able to indicate the fact that they've got a mandate. This economic team, I think, has got three goals. The first goal is market acceptance, because the market, when they were announced, the market went up several hundred points. Everyone was happy with the result, and that's very important because of the way we've seen the volatility of the marketplace the last couple of weeks. So playing to the markets and making sure that they are secure in the nominees is important. Goal one already achieved. Number two is the economic crisis, because what's been thrown in the lap of President-elect Obama is some real dire straits. Monday, I guess, they announced the fact that, lo and behold, we really do have a recession. So they're going to have to craft a recovery package, which is going to have those different components to it that typically go in recovery packages, which are perhaps construction projects, possible tax breaks, relief for individual homeowners, relief for wage earners. But then in addition, down the line, after they're done with those two major steps, they're going to have to figure out, what do we do about fixing the system going forward? I think that's probably a 2-year project, but they've got a lot on their plates, but they're clearly very capable.
How about new banks? Should money be coming into new banks instead of all the bailouts to the old guys?
Well, the answer is I think that it should be, but let's take a look at California, in particular Los Angeles. You go back 25 years, and I always like their historical perspective myself. We had Security Pacific, we had First Interstate, we had a big piece of Bank of America. They're all gone now. California has very few major money-centered banks that are left. Actually, they're regional banks.
Why?
They got acquired. They've moved elsewhere. And I think that the management of those institutions, from my perspective, have lost sight of the fact that California is the #1 marketplace in the United States. And I think they should be paying more attention to us here. But what's happened when they left? Small and medium-sized banks have moved in. They are knowledgeable about the marketplace. They're knowledgeable about what Southern California is. It's a middle management, small business haven. They understand them. They capture those.
So there are new banks in LA.
Absolutely. Dozens of them.
LA.
And they're all meeting needs.
And are we going to have influence in Washington from LA? Because I don't see any names in this cabinet that represent the power of the financial interest of Los Angeles.
Well, I think, again, that remains to be seen, but certainly the two senators from California are becoming quite senior. They're very, very well respected on the business side, particular Senator Feinstein, and we'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Joe the banker. We appreciate your being on LA Business today.
Well, I appreciate the time. Thank you for having me.
I'm Sharon Jimenez. This is LA Business Today. ABC is canceling any further episodes of Dirty, Sexy Money.
Really?
And the reality show Wall Street can't find a network that wants to run the show about America's financial system run amok.
Little wonder Dirty Money just isn't very sexy when the reality of lost pension funds, foreclosed homes, and economic hardship rear their very real heads.
Yes. And as always, Hollywood is ready with some sugar-coated sweet fare to help us through these economic sticky times. Lots of box office fluff is coming our way.
Yeah, our hometown industry got us through the Great Depression and 2 world wars by offering up a lot of fluff and a lot of sentimentality.
So let's go to a movie. Right, Annie? I'm Sharon Jimenez.
And I'm Bob Jimenez. Daddy Warbucks joins me in thanking you for watching LA Business Today.
City View Channel 35. Your city, your channel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ad Hoc Committee on Economic Recovery and Reinvestment, special meeting for Friday, November 20th, 2009, and we're here in the John Farrell Council Chamber, a committee of one so far, but I'm sure we will grow in strength as the minutes progress. We have two items that are on the agenda for today, three if you count our regular updates. So let's go ahead and, for the public and for everyone else, hear our update. Good morning, Mr. Clark.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Jim Clark, Director of Federal Relations for the Mayor's Office. Well, I'd like to start off with some good news. Last night, the Mayor's softball team came from behind with 3 runs in the bottom of the 6th inning and won our 4th game, so we're now at 500.
Excellent. Who was the victim this time?
I forget what the name, but this is a team that we had played previously and lost to, so it was sweet revenge for us. And the reason I mention that is that several of the members on the team will be part of the presenters today, and I wanted to
Congratulations to all of you. I hope you're not
recognize their efforts. Speaking of team, I wanted to also introduce to you Anna Mae Uton, who is with the CAO's office, who is going to be part of joining our team as the project manager for ARA. And she'll be joining us and sitting at the table from time to time, but we'll also still have Bill Kreitz here to address you every Friday and give you an update on what's going on as well, too.
Okay.
As far as my report, I wanted to first call your attention to this GAO report, the summary. A couple of points in that. The GAO was testifying on Capitol Hill yesterday. There's been a great amount of outcry about the federal recovery.gov website and inaccuracies, particularly in the area of job creation. And so this was part of a report that they were asked to prepare about that. 2 points I wanted to make, and the first, if you'll turn to basically the first part of it says what GAO found. Interestingly, it says that out of the $787 billion of ARA funds, only $173 billion have been distributed by the federal government. So only about 22% of the actual stimulus money has found its way out of the federal government. I think that's important. The other part is further down in that paragraph. It talks about that only 25% of that money, in fact, is money that goes for a use of grants and the kinds of things that we're applying for, contracts and loans. So a total of $47 billion out of $787 billion. And as we've reported from time to time, the most amount of money that is going to be coming into the city of Los Angeles is really not money that's coming directly to us from the stimulus, but rather the entitlements and the tax relief. And as you can see, about 75% of more than 75% of all the stimulus money is money that is coming to people in Los Angeles by way of that route rather than through the programs that we're qualifying for. The other point that they make, though, too, is the fact that, and we found this out firsthand, that there are a lot of problems with the recovery.gov site in terms of the reporting. They talk about erroneous or questionable data entries, that only 90% of the ARA grant money that was distributed was reported upon, so there's 10% that they still are waiting to get reports on. Fortunately, we were 100% here in the city of Los Angeles. They're going through and doing a quality assurance, but only about 1% of the reports have really been checked. And there's been a problem in calculating what is full-time equivalents, particularly with universities that don't operate on a full year. So these are problems that are going to be worked out. I'm sure that things will come better in line as we're going along. But I just wanted to give you a snapshot of kind of what's going on nationally on the stimulus.
And it did not go further. If only 22% of the money that's been allocated has actually been paid out, it didn't go any further to look at whether that's been spent on the street.
Oh, in terms of spending, I think probably we're maybe 15% of that money has been spent if we're lucky,
So which would, if that was 15 of that, then we'd be looking at about 3% of the money allocated actually has been spent.
Yeah, right.
That's an astounding statistic.
People say, well, gee, where are you in the process? And we keep mentioning to them we're just at the beginning of this and not to, to keep that there'll be more coming down the line. That leads me into the next.
I can just pause there for 1 second, just for folks that are following this. I mean, that's both good news and bad news. It's bad news and the slowness and the need that's out there. The good news is, as we look at this coming year, the real impact of government spending will probably be most strongly felt in calendar year 2010 in terms of a shot in the arm to the economy. It's unfortunate. We could use the shot more quickly, but be that as it may, it will at least be a silver lining this coming year.
Right. We still face the problem, though, the fact that these monies are generally siloed and for specific reasons, and we can't use a lot of times to supplant our budget, whereas the state and the school districts got budget stabilization funds, local government did not. So we're receiving money over here to spend it for new programs. At the same time, we're having to cut services or personnel on the other side. The last thing I wanted to mention was we've had this discussion, and I thought it was finally about time to put this together, of a comparison of how Los Angeles is doing in relationship to other cities. So I looked at 4 other national cities: New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Houston, and looked at 3 California cities: San Francisco, San Diego, and San Jose. Now, there's some caveats that I have to give to you, though, in looking at this information. One of the caveats is that we tried to confirm this information using at least 3 sources. We looked at the recovery.gov website, which, as we know now, has significant problems with it. One of the problems we found is that you can sort by zip code, but you can't sort by a city. You can sort by a county, but you can't sort by a city. So what we generally did is started with the city hall address for these cities, and then it kind of worked our way out trying to find these different grant opportunities. The second thing we did is we looked at the city's own website to see what they were reporting, and some of them are pretty good and others are not so good. Houston, for example, had a great listing of all of the things they've applied for, but didn't have any information on what they received. LA County, you can't even find their recovery website at all. If you go to the home page or anywhere it's very difficult to find it. But we tried to get as much information as we could from that. We also went to the federal agencies that were funding these programs to see their announcements. Again, it's spotty. Some agencies are very good about reporting who got the grants and the amounts. Others are a little more difficult to do. On the California cities, we went to the California recovery site. It's good in some respects, but again, we get different numbers. And finally, in some cases, we called the cities up. Again, in the case of Houston, this is run through their city controller's office, but I had a difficult time even finding out who was managing the ARA program for the city of Houston. So, second caveat is that we're sometimes comparing apples and oranges here, because we run a port, an airport, we have our own utility, others don't. So some of this money that goes to other agencies will go to a transit agency or will go to a private utility or whatever. What I tried to do was this is not all of the grants, and that's why the number is much smaller. I looked at the formula ones that were in common with most of the other jurisdictions, and I looked at the competitive grants that I thought were most in common with other jurisdictions. So this isn't an exhaustive list, and we should look at it that way. What we'd like to do, though, is to continue to follow this, to continue to update it, and make this available to you. Also, at the bottom, I put down money that's come into our area through the stimulus, through the county, MTA, school district, community college district, and the 2 universities. To give you some idea.
Thank you for this information. This is a very good start. Do you feel like this chart, because of all the different pieces yet, gives you any idea to assess how we're doing, or is this not synthesized yet in a...
Yeah, I would say... when I got done looking at this chart, actually I felt better about how we're doing in comparison to others. I noticed that in some of the things where we were disappointed that we didn't get competitive, the competitive grants that we didn't get, other jurisdictions didn't get it either. And so I realized that we're pretty much right in the ballpark with most of the other, obviously New York gets a lot. Chicago is interesting. They've got a large public housing fund, as you can see, that much more than we've got. And so that contributed a lot to theirs. They also got a significant amount of capital transit funding as well, too.
Is that capital transit reflected in the MTA piece for us, or is it a separate?
Yeah, and I'm going to report on that unless there's somebody from DOT here, but basically that was a formula grant in which $6.9 billion of which 90% of it went to urbanized areas according to a formula, but in some cases it goes to MTAs, but we received $8 million directly here, but it could have, this money can also go to transit authorities, and that's where the bulk of it went.
So, I mean, that was, I think we've all seen that map that you showed us before, or many people have, with a very small circle around LA and a big one around New York.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that accounted for some of that disparity, that in reality, if you look at the MTA, not at LA City, whether those, because people are shopping that around town saying, look how badly we're doing.
Yeah.
If we are, I want to know that if it's apples and oranges, we should know that too.
And well, then that's difficult. Take like the surface transportation program at the top there. We were able to, in California, get the state legislature to pass a formula so that we knew exactly how much we were going to go. For the other states, though, the money went to the state, and then they apportioned it out, basically, and it would have gone to sometimes to counties and cities. So I don't, in some of these instances with Chicago, I'm still not clear as to whether this is money that directly went to Chicago or it went to Chicago and Cook County as well, where we would be able to count some of the money that would come to Los Angeles County.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, as we continue to synthesize this, I think working with the CAO as well, what would be useful in tracking this too is looking at the size of their budgets in these entities. I mean, San Francisco is a city county, so while we could look at population, San Francisco is much less than whatever this formula would be, 2/5 of LA in terms of population, but in terms of budget, we actually have pretty similar budgets. They have about a $5 billion, I think, $4 billion budget with the city-county consolidated there, as opposed to us. And again, it may be a decent comparison with population because a lot of the county grant type of things aren't in here, the health care and other things that we obviously can't compare it to. But where it is doable, it would be very interesting to do that, and maybe even to pull out a couple different categories, look at public safety, look at transportation, and just see how we're doing there. Because I think this is a great start. I do think we need a more useful measure overall, and we can continue to work with you to develop that. But I know that the data mining is very difficult, and I don't know if anybody nationally, if Brookings or the Urban Institute or anybody is trying to do this, but I assume many cities are interested, and maybe it's even something we could ask with the amount of money we pay to the National League of Cities every year. They've got a big staff, and I think our dues account for probably 3 or 4 employees there. That this is a high priority for us. So working maybe with Councilmember Reyes, who is on the board there, but also obviously we have staff that's in their offices right in D.C. So that would be, I think, another place that we might be able to ask them to start kind of giving us what is a good measure and what is a quantitative measure that we can do to assess that. Okay.
I know that in talking to other cities, when we work on, they were very interested in, and we've promised them that we would send them this information, so they're curious as well too. To them.
Of course.
And I also wanted to thank particularly Leo Pistelnikov on our staff who helped verify and acquire this information.
Thank you, Leo. Okay.
That's my report.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Bill Kreitz of the CAO's office. That's probably a perfect segue into my report today.
Which part? Thank you, Leo, or something else?
I'm sorry. The jobs information.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Got you.
I thank Leo, too. But as you have before you, we have added to your briefing package a sort of at-a-glance dashboard that talks about the grant applications and awards. And what I wanted to say is, of the 45 projects that we reported on for the period ending September 30th to the OMB or to the prime recipients, we found that, and this is also in response to Mr. Rosenthal's request at the last meeting about jobs created and retained, we found that approximately 2% of the awarded dollars had been expended by the September 30th reporting deadline, and approximately 4% of the expected jobs created and retained, or 4% of the expected jobs for creation or retention had been created or retained. And I think that's primarily due to a couple of factors. Number one, funding for the awards in many cases came rather late in that reporting period. So it's very difficult to start the projects and to show jobs created or retained with that short lead time. Also, for some of the projects, there is a considerable lead time. For example, construction projects, you have plans, you have permits, you have RFPs in some cases, you have materials acquisition, and the jobs don't start until many of those things are approved or ready to go. And thirdly, some of the projects have jobs. For example, let's say a job training program. They have jobs as the outcome, but that comes after a period of training, so that would come later in the in different reporting periods. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's also in your briefing package, and we will put this on the LA Recovery website today as well. What I would like to also say is, with respect to report backs, Mr. Garcetti, you and Mr. Rosendahl had requested at the last meeting that we post significant documents to the LA Recovery website so that people can go either to the City Clerk's Council File Index or directly to the LA Recovery website. And we have begun to do that. We placed the CAO's report on the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant that was heard by the committee 2 weeks ago, as well as the Justice Assistance, the JAG Grant Award is going to be heard today in this committee. Those have already been posted to a separate section in the LA Recovery. We'll continue to do that so that the public as well as city employees can go directly to the LA Recovery website to view that information. And finally, since the last meeting on November 6th, we have not had any grant applications submitted. We are at 138 projects that we've submitted requests for funding for a total of $1.4 billion, should we get all that. And then we have 76 awards so far for a total of $412 million, and we do not expect any applications to be submitted to the granting agencies in the next week. That would conclude my presentation.
Okay. Before we go to the specific grants, any general questions, colleagues? We just went over, there was an initial stab at a comparison chart in the big cities and some other California cities, a comparison there. And then there was also the study from the GAO, Government Accountability Office, on what the jobs data that's been posted on the U.S. recovery website, whether those were accurate and how that counting was. You know, one of the things to really take away that hits me hard, both in terms of our earlier conversation and then those numbers that you provided, is that we're, well beyond a year into this deep economic downturn, and we can point to about 270 jobs that have been actually created. That's, I think, a lack of a sense of urgency at the federal level, and whatever we can do, there's nothing more important, and those may just be retained. I mean, we welcomed Days of Our Lives, or we're welcoming Days of Our Lives back to Los Angeles, and they probably created as much as the entire stimulus bill right now in Los Angeles, to put that into perspective. So as we, look at that and what we can do, I think it's important for that feedback to get to the federal government. I think it's important for that feedback to get into our own bureaucracy and to really have a sense of urgency about us not keeping the same pace the federal government is, that when that money comes here, that we have everything ready to go. If we can be a best practices city on that, I think it will distinguish us, but more importantly, it'll serve the people who need this help. It is always exciting to track the numbers of how much we say on paper we've gotten and that we will get. That's an extremely sobering number to look at 270 jobs that are actually, and that's of September 30th, so there may be more since then, but 270 jobs estimated to have actually been retained or generated. Any further questions in a general sense? Okay. All right. Let's go then to 1A, if we may.
I don't. Oh, there is a representative from DOT here, so I'll turn it over to Jim Lefton. All right. That's your one-pager on the screen.
Okay.
Everybody scattered as soon as you hit the table. I wouldn't take it personally, though. It's all good. Good morning.
I'm Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation.
Nice to see you, Jim.
The department received an allocation through the MTA for $8 million in ERA funds, which we applied for to purchase 16 new CNG-powered commuter express buses to replace a like number of existing diesel-powered buses in our commuter express fleet. The grant was approved in July. The department signed a contract with a company to build the buses in September of this year, and we hope to receive the buses by summer or fall of 2010. So we're on track to receive the buses and receive the grant funding for that project.
How many of these buses do we own right now, overall, in the fleet?
We have about 100 buses in our commuter express fleet and about additional 8 CNG-powered buses, but the 100 diesel-powered buses in our fleet are all due for replacement, and this would be our initial stab at replacing the first 16 of that fleet.
And then then we have a program for the rest of them moving
Yes.
forward in future years, but 16 is the most we do this year.
This year, 16 would be the most, yes, but we are looking at replacing our entire fleet over the next approximately 3 years.
And I'm sorry, I should know this probably, but so we own, but then others operate our commuter express. Is that
That's correct.
for liability reasons or something that we?
We own the buses in part because it's more cost-effective for the city to purchase the buses than to lease the buses.
Okay. All right. Any questions, colleagues? Yeah, Mr. Parks.
Side issue. When will we get the report from LADOT about your reevaluation of all of our bus service?
We did council briefings this week. We're going to be putting it out to the public for comment, and we hope to have final recommendations to the City Council the second meeting in January.
And this is dealing with DASH and Commuter Express?
It's dealing with all DOT transit programs, including DASH, Commuter Express, City Ride, and Charter Bus.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. If there's no further questions, appreciate the information.
Okay.
And is there anything that we're doing beyond the application in terms of once it's in, we can't talk to anybody in D.C., but have we been having conversations leading up with anybody in D.C. who are the decision makers on this?
We'll work with Jim Clark on that.
Okay. It would be good, even if the day before the application goes in, that's your last moment under the administration rules to actually talk to anybody, so.
Okay.
Thanks. If we go to number 2, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Melissa Fleming with the CAO. The Mayor's Office of Homeland Security and Public Safety is with me, and they're requesting authority to accept the ARA JAG, or Justice Assistance Grant. The JAG is unique in that it provides an allocation to 77 jurisdictions within and including the county and of Los Angeles, and so the city will act as the administrative agent for this grant on behalf of all those 77 different jurisdictions. So therefore, we will receive the grant funds from the federal government and then distribute them to the rest of the jurisdictions within the county. The total JAG award for the region is $30.5 million, of which the city itself will receive about $11.1 million, including $8 million for programmatic expenditures and $3.1 million for administrative expenses associated with administering the grant on behalf of the entire region.
On top of that 11.1 or include?
The 11 includes the $3 million, so it's $8 million we'll spend on projects and $3 million roughly that we'll use for administrative expenditures. So of the $8 million for programmatic expenditures, $1 million will be dedicated to the city's gang reduction strategy, including about $500,000 for the Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office and $500,000 for the Community Law Enforcement and Recovery Program. And we have representatives here to discuss each of these programs if you have specific questions.
Sorry, can you slow down just a little bit? So of the $1 million for the gang focus grant, so half of that is also administrative for the office itself?
So of the $8 million that we're talking about for programs is all for projects. So of that, $500,000 will go to grid projects.
Projects, okay, not the grid office.
2 different projects.
Right, okay.
Correct. And then $500,000 will go to the CLEAR program.
Okay.
So there's an additional $7 million of programmatic expenditures that, as of right now, the CAO has proposed, due to the city's budget situation, to potentially look at modifying in order to reprogram to help us basically combat our deficit. So I want to be clear in discussing that the JAG-ARA requires that all jurisdictions sign an MOU, and that MOU between all the different jurisdictions currently states that the city and county will each be spending $7 million of their total allocation for the LA-RICS, Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communications Project. So what we're proposing right now is that the city delay expenditure of the $7 million that we currently have dedicated to the LA-RICS project in order to look at a potential grant modification that could have an immediate impact to help fight LAPD's budget deficit.
So that we take the $7 million that was in the general fund budget and put this in place of it?
The grant does not allow supplanting, so we could not take money away from the general fund. However, LAPD still has a significant deficit in the current year and is projected for the future fiscal years. So because of the revenue deficit in the city, we could utilize these funds to continue police operations effectively.
And there's complete flexibility on that?
The JAG award is very flexible in what we can utilize funds for, as long as they're associated with justice expenditures.
So as long as it's not LA Rick's supplantation, then we can use it.
Correct. So as long as it's not supplantation, exactly, we could use it for another project.
Okay. How will that process work on what the $7 million are? Are we just going to LAPD and saying, tell us where your holes are? Or are we?
Well, it's sort of a two-part process. So you're absolutely right. We have to work with LAPD to look at what their goals are and what we could utilize, what would be a grant-eligible project, and create that project. The second part of that is because we do have to sign an MOU with all the other jurisdictions. That MOU currently does state that the city and county will each be using $7 million of their money for LA RICS. So we have to move forward with executing that MOU, or none of the jurisdictions who are currently going to receive money will be able to receive those funds.
Can this money be used for DNA and rape kits? Could be.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So because of that, in order to go forward with receiving the grant, when we sign the MOU, we are agreeing to the LA RICS project. So in order to modify the budget, we would have to go forward and get an amendment to the MOU that would have to be agreed to by both the city and the county.
And what we'd be agreeing to is that we're going to still do that project. We could just do it in a slightly slower pace and with future funds as well.
So what we would be agreeing is that we would spend $7 million to LA RICS at this point, and then we would work with the county to discuss with them the potential to modify that allocation to another project for the city.
Okay. So the modification doesn't happen with the feds at that point. We can do it.
Correct. The modification, as this grant goes forward, we're agreeing to LA RICS right now. We're looking at potentially modifying it in the future.
And sorry to stick on this, but I just want to make sure we're good. And the federal government will not have a problem with us modifying, even though we signed an MOU saying that we're doing this?
Well, we would have to then as long as we get an amendment to the MOU that's executed with the county, then they will be fine with that. Okay. Assuming it's a grant-eligible project, which is what they would have to approve.
And the CLEAR is the existing CLEAR program?
That's correct. It continues the existing CLEAR staffing.
In Northeast, for Northeast LA and...
There are 9 different CLEAR sites. A specific grant, I believe, provides funding to the Southwest CLEAR site and the 77th Florence Graham CLEAR site.
Okay. All right. Other questions, Mr. Parks?
Let me just clarify. I didn't quite understand. You said we're going to go forward with the $7 million for the MOU, but then we'll reprogram it once we get it?
So effectively, that's correct. So right now, in order to move forward, there's an MOU out there that all 77 jurisdictions have to sign. As of Wednesday, 76 of those jurisdictions have signed the MOU. The only organization who has not is the city. So by moving forward, we signed the MOU. In that MOU, we are agreeing to LA RICS, so we want to be clear about that. However, we can delay expenditure of those funds, specifically because LA RICS is a long-term project, and so the portion of the funds that we would have dedicated to this, we would simply not expend at this time, and then continue to work with the county to potentially modify the funds for another project.
And the county has the yay or nay on that? They don't have to agree to that?
You're correct. They do not have to agree to that. I'm not sure what the status of those particular negotiations
One of the things I'm concerned is that in this RICS project, they're talking could go up to several $100 million at some point. And so if that's the case, do we inadvertently delay it by that action? Does it put it off schedule?
As of right now, the LA RICS project is estimated to be about $600 million. The city and county and the urban area have jointly provided approximately $100 million in grant funds to that project. Those grant funds are enough as of right now to move the project forward, which includes release of an RFP in the early quarter of next year to look at the sort of creation and the engineering document design for the LA RICS system. This particular these grant funds would go towards the portion of the infrastructure creation for the project, which we're not even at the stage of expending yet.
Okay. And then how does the council become aware of the reprogramming?
So as of right now, effectively what we're requesting authority to do is accept the grant as is. There are no authorities in the grant or in this particular transmittal to do anything with the $7 million. So in order to use those funds, regardless of whether they would be programmed for LA RICS or any other project, the mayor's office will be required to come back to council.
Okay.
So as of right now, we're just
going for the grant.
Correct.
We'll be notified whether it's through the council that whether it's spent on LA RICS or reprogrammed.
Correct.
Okay. The other issue, and this is probably not within your sphere, but one of the things that every time we've had LA RICS come before the council, I just don't have a real strong feeling. I know the fire department is heavily involved, but I just don't get a sense that the rest of the city is grabbed onto this when we're talking about $600 million, that we're going to hopefully one day end up with a project that all departments are involved. I mean, last time we spoke to somebody on that issue, they hadn't quite talked to Harbor Department, and Harbor Department seemed to be going on their own interoperability. And then we have the LAX police, and we have General Services Police. And I'm just fearful that, you know, we'll end up spending $600 million and we'll look up and have left somebody out, which was the whole purpose of making everybody be able to speak to each other over the same equipment. And so it just, I don't know, maybe when the RFP and those things, we'll have a more identifiable structure in the city who's driving this. Because the spokesperson has been the fire department, and we don't, you know, just disparage them, but the key is it's supposed to be a citywide program, not a department program.
Right. It's not only a citywide program, but a region-wide program. I do know, I believe there are 85 jurisdictions currently as of right now that are members of the JPA. So it's not only...
I mean, for the city, when I say citywide, every entity in the city needs to be a part of this, or else we will be supporting something that's regional-wide and have pieces in the city that are not part of it. That's what my concern is. Maybe that structure is being formulated, but I just have not had a sense when we've had presentations that we have a real strong structure to make sure that every entity that will be impacted in the city is going to have a voice and be a part of it. And because when we look at the rest of the county or the region, we're probably more complicated in the city than the entire region. And so I'd hate to have this structure and we put all this energy and money, and then we find out within the city we're not fully functional. So whoever deals with that in the CAO's office and such, we just want to keep emphasizing that until we get a sense that the structure in the city is driving.
Right, and you're absolutely right. While I do not personally work on that project, I have been in several meetings where there have been discussions that included both the airport and the harbor and GSD police and a variety of city agencies. So I do believe that they have made sort of strides, leaps and bounds to make sure that all our sort of public safety partners within the city and the region are included in the project.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move the CAO recommendations.
We will be. I want to ask actually one other question. Just on, we've got excellent people in the office, and so this next question does not reflect them at all. The $3 million in overhead, how does that compare to other places? I know these are very difficult grants to administer, so it does require a lot of people hours. But first of all, what does the $3 million represent in terms of administrative costs? Is that just salaries? And then secondly, you know, in terms of nonprofit percentage, you know, for nonprofit organizations, 30% overhead is pretty high. For CDD with CDBG and stuff, I think we have a lower percentage. Certainly in the housing department, we have a much lower percentage, much closer to 9%, I think, in overhead. Why are we at 30% for administrative costs?
You're referring to 30%, which is of the city's allocation. The administrative expenditures are not just associated with the city's allocation. So it's 10% of the total grant award because we administer the grant on behalf of all the other jurisdictions. So it's 10% of our total amount that we're receiving. It's 10% of the total award, but
Gotcha.
It looks much higher. You're absolutely right when you're looking at it.
Do we get reimbursements from anybody, or they just allow us to do that and they give us the extra allocation?
We effectively take it off the top before we provide it to them.
Okay. All right, we'll move the CAO's recommendations. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Parks, to the recommendations? Did you want to add anything to the CAO's recommendations, or are you okay?
No, I think
moving them? Okay.
We're going to deal with the CAO's some of their issues with the cap on another issue coming through budget and finance.
I would add one instruction, if I may, that as we look at supplanting, maybe the price of coming before this committee is that even though we're doing a great job at reducing the DNA backlog, I'd like for us to look at you know, an allocation of about a seventh of that. If we get all $7 million to be able to supplant it, an additional $1 million if it was 3.5, an additional 500,000, about a seventh of that, I think, to continue that pace. We've met with advocates. They're pleased that we're making progress, but I just think the backlog and the justice that these survivors deserve, it's incumbent upon us wherever we can to look at that. So I'd like to add that instruction.
That's on the DNA? The one thing I just asked on the DNA is that we have had a history of hiring people and buying equipment, and it just drives our overhead up. I would just like to see if we continue to look for ways to go out to vendors to use for testing rather than invest in people and equipment that is a long-term expenditure that never goes away, but that I think we've costed it out that for dollar, you can get more testing done by going out as opposed to paying salary and overhead. And so I would just like to make sure that we have a balance in how we deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thank you. We'll go ahead and approve. Move the CEO report. Anything the mayor's office wanted to say? As long as you're at the table? You're good? Good to go?
It looks like we're able to cover it all, but
okay.
If you have more questions, let us know.
Will do. Appreciate it. All right. That will take us to general public comment. Do we have any public comment, Mr. Clerk? Okay. That will adjourn the meeting.